Nolan Lancaster had everything: power, influence, and a name that carried weight in every high-rise office in Chicago. The self-made millionaire husband was the kind of man people admired, envied, and feared. But love, commitment, those were complications he never had time for. Married to the gentle, yet fiercely talented Sophia Caldwell, a rising artist with a heart full of dreams, Nolan's world appeared picture-perfect to outsiders. They were the golden couple, business and art blending seamlessly in the public eye. But behind the closed doors of their luxurious penthouse, cracks had already begun to form. When Sophia became pregnant, everything collapsed. Instead of joy, Nolan met her announcement with cold disbelief. He accused her of trapping him, of destroying everything he had built. His words, sharp and unforgiving, cut deeper than any betrayal. The man she had once trusted with her soul now looked at her as if she were a burden. Finally, he gave her an ultimatum: leave or terminate the pregnancy. With nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart, Sophia walked out of his life. That was 5 years ago. Now, a woman unlike the one he had cast aside has returned, stronger, sharper, and undeniably captivating. Dressed in confidence and moving with an elegance that commands attention, Sophia Caldwell steps back into the city that once broke her. But she is not alone. A bright-eyed child clings to her hand, calling her mama. To the outside world, Nolan Lancaster is still the embodiment of success. Born to a working-class family in Ohio, he clawed his way to the top with relentless ambition and a willingness to take risks no one else dared. By his early 30s, he had become a financial mastermind, transforming struggling businesses into thriving empires. Wealth followed, then power, and finally the fascination of a society obsessed with self-made millionaires. They had met at a lavish charity gala in Los Angeles. Among the sea of high society elites, Sophia stood apart, her deep sapphire dress accentuating a quiet beauty that needed no embellishment. Unlike the others vying for his attention, she never asked about stocks or business ventures. Instead, she spoke of art, passion, and purpose. She was different. And for the first time in a long while, Nolan had felt truly seen. Their romance became front-page news, a whirlwind love story of art and industry colliding. The wedding was a spectacle, held in an opulent estate, with the guest list boasting Hollywood moguls and tech billionaires. Sophia was hailed as the woman who had tamed Nolan Lancaster's ruthless heart. But love was never enough to keep him grounded. His empire demanded constant attention. He spent his days in boardrooms and private jets, closing deals in New York, San Francisco, and Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Sophia was left in an empty mansion, painting scenes of loneliness she never dared put into words. Sophia spent her days in a home that wasn't hers. The grand estate, with its marble floors and towering windows, should have been a sanctuary, but it was nothing more than an empty showcase of Nolan's success. The staff greeted her politely, tending to the house like a well-oiled machine. But she was merely another piece of decoration, a neglected wife in a world where wealth mattered more than love. At first, she tried to fit into his world, accompanying him on trips, attending business dinners, and smiling at investors who barely acknowledged her presence. But Nolan was always preoccupied, his mind consumed by million-dollar deals and expansion plans. Their late-night talks, once filled with dreams and whispered confessions, had dwindled into brief phone calls, if he called at all. She told herself it was temporary, that he would realize what he was losing. Then everything changed. The moment the pregnancy test turned positive, Sophia's heart swelled with hope. This would be their fresh start, the moment that reconnected them. She imagined Nolan's expressions softening, his hands cradling her belly, his voice full of excitement at the thought of fatherhood. She had seen glimpses of tenderness in him before. Surely this would bring it back. But when she told him, his reaction was ice cold. He stared at her, his expression unreadable at first. Then came the accusations. Sharp, cutting words that left her breathless. He called it a trap, a calculated move to tie him down, to steal his focus from his empire. He had never wanted children. Why would she do this to him? The man who once traced love letters on her skin now looked at her with nothing but resentment. She pleaded, tried to reason with him, but his mind was made up. The argument turned vicious, his words stripping away every ounce of security she had left. And then came the ultimatum: leave or get rid of the baby. That night, she packed her bags. As she stood at the mansion's grand entrance, rain splattered against the pavement, mixing with the tears she refused to wipe away. The life she had built, the love she had believed in, had crumbled in a matter of minutes. Her fingers trembled as she clutched the handle of her suitcase, her body hollow with disbelief. Behind her, Nolan remained inside, unmoving, untouched by the storm raging outside. A taxi pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The driver, sensing her distress, stepped out to help. "Where to, miss?" Sophia hesitated. There was nowhere to go, no plan, no destination, just a child growing inside her and a future that had been rewritten against her will. "Anywhere but here," she whispered, sliding into the back seat. As the car pulled away, she allowed herself one last glance at the mansion, her former home, her former life. And then she turned forward, refusing to look back. She wasn't the same woman anymore. And Nolan Lancaster, her millionaire husband, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Sophia stared out the rain-streaked window of the taxi, her hands resting on her stomach, as the city lights blurred past. The driver asked where she was headed, but she hesitated. She could go to Seattle, where her family lived, but facing them now, broken, abandoned, felt like surrender. Instead, she forced herself to say, "Take me to a hotel, somewhere quiet." The suite was pristine, but it felt suffocating. The white walls, the crisp sheets, the silence, it was all a cruel contrast to the chaos inside her. She tried calling Nolan once, hoping for a moment of regret, a sliver of kindness, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The next morning, she checked her bank account, expecting it to be empty, but her access remained untouched. Had he simply forgotten to cut her off, or was this his way of paying her to disappear? Either way, she refused to live under his shadow. She left Chicago behind, boarding a bus that carried her away from everything she had known. She ended up in a quiet, coastal town in Oregon, a place she had once visited during an art retreat. It was far enough to escape the whispers of high society, yet familiar enough to not feel entirely lost. The ocean air carried a crispness that steadied her frayed nerves, and she found a small cottage near the water. Just enough for herself and the child she was determined to protect. At first, the loneliness was unbearable. The town was small, and she had no one to confide in. As her belly grew, so did her worries. How would she afford medical care? Would she ever rebuild her career? She had some savings, but they wouldn't last forever. Determined not to let fear control her, she turned to the only thing she had left, her art. Using her maiden name, she began selling her paintings online. Slowly, buyers took notice, and while it wasn't a fortune, it was enough to survive. One afternoon, while struggling to carry groceries inside, an elderly woman from next door, Margaret Hawthorne, stepped in to help. With warm eyes and a kindness that felt foreign after months of rejection, she introduced herself. From that day on, Margaret became a quiet source of support, bringing over warm meals and insisting on taking Sophia to her doctor's appointments. Over tea one evening, Margaret finally asked about the baby's father. Sophia hesitated, then simply said, "He didn't want us." Margaret nodded, unfazed. "Then he's a fool. But you, my dear, are stronger than you know." Sophia wanted to believe that, and as she placed a protective hand over her stomach, she whispered a promise to the child inside her. No matter how much she had lost, they would build a future, one that didn't include her millionaire husband. Sophia's labor began before dawn, the sound of crashing waves filling the small cottage as she gripped the edge of the worn kitchen counter. Margaret, her ever-reliable neighbor, rushed her to the nearest hospital, her voice soothing yet firm. Hours later, under the soft glow of sterile lights, a tiny cry filled the room. They placed a baby girl in her arms, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the betrayal, not the loneliness, not even the man who had cast them aside. She named her daughter Lily Caldwell, giving her only the name that mattered. The first year tested Sophia in ways she never imagined. Sleepless nights blurred into long days as she juggled feedings, diaper changes, and the overwhelming weight of single motherhood. The cottage, once a quiet refuge, now echoed with cries and laughter. But no matter how exhausted she felt, one look at Lily's bright eyes reminded her why she fought so hard. She couldn't afford to dwell on Nolan. He had chosen his path, and she had chosen hers. But some nights, when the house was quiet, she wondered if he ever thought about the life he had left behind. Determined to build a future for her daughter, Sophia returned to the only thing she knew: her art. Every spare moment Lily napped, she painted, pouring raw emotion onto each canvas. Scenes of heartbreak and healing took shape, colors blending into stories too deep for words. She sold pieces online, using only her initials to avoid unwanted attention. Slowly, interest grew. Margaret, ever the encourager, watched over Lily while Sophia traveled to nearby markets, selling her work to small galleries. Word spread of the mysterious artist whose paintings held untold sorrow and strength. By the time Lily was 2, Sophia realized the tiny cottage was no longer enough. A breakthrough came unexpectedly at a charity auction in Portland. A well-known gallery owner, Daniel Whitmore, paused before one of her pieces, drawn to the intensity behind the brushstrokes. His offer was immediate: a featured spot in his upcoming exhibit, a stepping stone into the world of serious collectors. For the first time in years, Sophia felt something close to hope. She had once been a woman abandoned by a millionaire husband, left with nothing but a broken heart and a child he never wanted. Now, she was an independent mother, an artist with a growing name, and a woman no longer defined by the man who had let her go. Sophia's exhibition was an undeniable triumph. Art critics marveled at the raw emotion behind her brushstrokes, calling her work a bold exploration of resilience and rebirth. Daniel Whitmore, the gallery owner who had given her a chance, introduced her to affluent collectors who eagerly commissioned private pieces. For the first time in years, financial security wasn't a distant dream, but a reality within her grasp. With her success came freedom. No longer did she have to ration every dollar between groceries and art supplies. She bought a charming home in Portland, complete with a sunlit studio where Lily could play while she painted. The house was small but filled with warmth, a stark contrast to the cold luxury of the mansion she had once shared with Nolan. Lily thrived, her laughter filling their home. She had Sophia's kind nature, but every so often, a certain look would cross her face, sharp, assessing, familiar. It was in those fleeting moments that Sophia was reminded of the man who had cast them aside. But she refused to let the past haunt her. She had built a life where she and her daughter didn't need him. Yet, fate had a way of pulling unfinished stories back together. 5 years had passed since Sophia disappeared from Nolan Lancaster's world. In that time, he had only grown more powerful. His empire expanded into international markets, his influence stretching across continents. He executed multi-billion-dollar mergers with ease, securing his reputation as a self-made businessman who turned everything he touched into gold. To the world, he was untouchable. He graced the covers of Forbes and Business Insider, his face a symbol of ambition and dominance. Interviews painted him as a man too focused on success for distractions like love or family. When reporters asked about his personal life, he deflected effortlessly. His wife? A part of his past. Nothing more. But the nights told a different story. Alone in his penthouse, surrounded by sleek furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Chicago skyline, Nolan felt an unfamiliar hollowness settle in his chest. He had everything: wealth, power, control, yet something was missing. Late at night, he found himself staring at his reflection in the glass, whiskey in hand, as memories crept in. Sophia's voice, soft and full of life. The way she used to look at him, believing in him even when he barely believed in himself. He had pushed her away, convinced that fatherhood would destroy the life he had built. But now, as his success reached new heights, he was beginning to question if he had sacrificed the wrong things. And soon, he would have to face the consequences of the choices he had made. Nolan Lancaster had always been a man who controlled his own destiny. He dictated the terms of every deal, crafted the future with precision, and cut out anything or anyone that threatened his ambitions. When Sophia told him she was pregnant, he saw it as sabotage, a reckless attempt to shackle him to a life he never wanted. Even now, 5 years later, resentment lingered like a dull ache, buried beneath the surface. But something had changed. Despite every effort to convince himself that he had made the right choice, doubts had started creeping in. In the quiet moments between board meetings and business deals, a single question haunted him. What if you made the wrong choice? He drowned the thought in work, expanding his empire, investing in philanthropic ventures, even becoming a patron of the arts. an ironic nod to a woman he tried to erase from his past. At every gala, every high-profile event, he found himself scanning the crowd, half expecting to see her. But every time it was just a stranger with the same dark hair, the same graceful posture. His personal life was as empty as ever. He indulged in fleeting relationships, models, actresses, socialites, but none lasted. He never let anyone get too close, never shared his penthouse, never allowed his carefully controlled world to be disrupted again. Even his parents, once proud of his relentless ambition, noticed the distance he kept. One evening, over an expensive bottle of wine, his longtime mentor, Richard Vaughn, leaned back in his chair and studied him carefully. "You've built an empire, Nolan. But what else is there?" "I have everything I need," Nolan replied smoothly, swirling the drink in his glass. Vaughn smirked. "Success without meaning isn't success at all. We both know that." Nolan dismissed the words, but later that night, as he walked through the city, they echoed in his mind. Outside a cafe, he saw a woman cradling a toddler, the child's laughter carrying through the air. A pang of something sharp and unfamiliar settled in his chest. Did he have a child out there? A son? A daughter? What would they look like? He shook the thought away. Sophia had made her choice, and so had he. But fate had a way of unraveling even the most carefully built lives. Across the country, in Portland, Sophia Caldwell was finalizing the details of her biggest art exhibit yet. The gallery was abuzz with excitement, local press calling it a must-see for art connoisseurs. As she arranged her paintings, she barely noticed the email that had just arrived in her inbox. An invitation. A high-profile charity gala in Chicago, hosted by an anonymous benefactor. They wanted to feature her work, calling her style a perfect representation of resilience and transformation. She hesitated. Returning to the city where everything fell apart was a risk. But she wasn't the same woman who had left, and without realizing it, she had just taken the first step toward coming face to face with the millionaire husband who had once thrown her away. Sophia's home studio buzzed with energy as Lily, now a spirited 5-year-old, danced around with a paintbrush in her tiny hands. Bright streaks of blue and yellow covered the small easel as she giggled, lost in her world of color. Sophia watched her daughter, a soft smile on her lips, remembering how art had once been her escape. Now, it was their bond. As she carefully packed a new collection of paintings for shipment, her phone vibrated on the wooden work table. The number was unfamiliar, but something about it made her pause. Answering cautiously, she was greeted by a warm yet professional voice. "Miss Caldwell, my name is Olivia Marks. I'm the Assistant Director of the Westbridge Foundation. We're hosting a charity gala in Chicago, and we would love to feature your work in our auction." Sophia had heard of the foundation. They focused on supporting women's shelters and empowerment programs, causes that had become deeply personal to her. The offer was tempting, but something in Olivia's tone hinted at more. "Our event's primary sponsor is a high-profile investor who has graciously offered to host the gala," Olivia continued. "He's personally requested a private preview of the featured artwork, including yours." Sophia's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. A high-profile investor in Chicago? A cold knot of suspicion formed in her stomach. She had spent years avoiding that city, knowing the risk of running into her past. Still, this wasn't just about her. It was an opportunity to showcase her work, to stand for something bigger than the pain she had endured. She wasn't the woman who had been cast aside anymore. After a long pause, she exhaled. "I'll attend on one condition. My personal details remain private." "Of course," Olivia assured her. "We'll handle all arrangements." That night, as she tucked Lily into bed, Sophia sat in her studio, staring at the city lights beyond the window. She had worked too hard to let fear dictate her choices. This wasn't about Nolan. This was about reclaiming her place in the world. And if fate decided it was time for her millionaire husband to see the life he had walked away from, then so be it. Sophia sat by the window, the soft hum of the train filling the quiet space around her. The distant glow of Chicago's skyline flickered in the night, a city she had once called home, but had long since abandoned. She traced the edge of her wedding ring, the one she had hidden away for years, feeling the cool metal press against her skin. 5 years had passed since she left, and she no longer needed Nolan Lancaster's approval. but knowing she might see him again sent an undeniable wave of nerves through her. Beside her, Lily pressed her small hands against the window, eyes wide with wonder. "It's so big, Mommy. Did you live here before?" Sophia smoothed her daughter's curls and smiled. "Yes, I did. Did Grandpa and Grandma visit you?" Sophia hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Not often, sweetheart, but I used to go to the museums and parks all the time." She left out the part where she had spent many of those days alone, waiting for a husband who never came home. Across the aisle, Margaret dozed lightly, having insisted on accompanying them for at least the first week. As the train slowed to a stop at Union Station, Sophia exhaled, bracing herself for the city that had once shattered her. Waiting on the platform was Olivia Marks, the poised and welcoming representative from the Westbridge Foundation. "Sophia, it's wonderful to finally meet you," she said warmly, shaking her hand. "We've arranged a suite for you at a family-friendly hotel. The next few days will be busy, planning meetings, artwork displays, and possibly a short speech about your journey." Sophia nodded, feeling the first prick of unease. "And the sponsor?" Olivia gave her a reassuring smile. "Still anonymous, but I hear he's a major player in Chicago's business scene. You'll find out at the High Society Gala." The back of Sophia's neck prickled. There were countless wealthy benefactors in the city. It didn't have to be him. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. Mornings were filled with meetings at the Foundation's downtown office, where she finalized the placement of her paintings. Afternoons, she let Lily experience the magic of the city, visiting Millennium Park, watching boats glide across the river, and exploring the grand halls of the Art Institute. Each time Lily giggled, Sophia felt her nerves ease, but an unshakable awareness lingered, as if the past was waiting just around the corner. One afternoon, Margaret took Lily to the Lincoln Park Zoo, giving Sophia time to rehearse her speech. Standing in an elegant boardroom, she tested the microphone, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. This moment wasn't just about art. It was about proving, to herself and to the world, that she had survived. And if fate had decided that her millionaire husband was about to re-enter her life, then this time she would be the one in control. Sophia straightened the note cards in her hands, her thoughts only half-focused as Olivia stepped away to take a call in the hallway. The conference room was quiet, the weight of the upcoming gala pressing down on her shoulders. She had spoken publicly before, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about art. It was about proving to herself that she could stand in the same city where she had once been broken and walk away unshaken. When Olivia returned, her expression was apologetic. "Small change in the schedule," she said carefully. "Our main sponsor has requested a private art preview tomorrow evening before the gala. He specifically asked if you'd be available." Sophia frowned. "Is that normal?" Olivia nodded. "He likes to meet the artists personally, understand their inspiration before the main event. It's usually just a quick conversation, nothing formal." Sophia forced a smile. She had no reason to assume the worst. Chicago was filled with wealthy patrons, and this could be anyone. But something about the secrecy sent a familiar chill down her spine. Still, refusing wasn't an option. This was too important. "Of course, just let me know when and where." That night, after tucking Lily into bed, Sophia paced the suite's living room, tension knotting in her stomach. Margaret watched her from the armchair. "You've been quiet since the call," she observed. Sophia hesitated before finally voicing the thought she had been trying to push away. "What if it's him?" Margaret didn't flinch. "Then you show him the woman you've become." Sophia exhaled, nodding. She had nothing to prove to Nolan Lancaster. But if fate had decided to bring him into her path, she would meet him on her own terms. The following evening, she stepped into the grand ballroom of a luxury Chicago hotel. The space glittered under chandeliers, the skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Staff rushed to finalize details, arranging tables draped in crisp white linen. Olivia stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, looking relieved when she spotted her. Sophia adjusted the sleek black dress that hugged her frame, a world away from the soft, romantic gowns she had once worn at Nolan's side. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked toward the curated display of her paintings. The warm lighting illuminated each canvas, stormy blues and fiery reds melting into soft pastels, a visual testament to the journey she had endured. Olivia touched her arm lightly. He should be here any minute. Sophia's pulse quickened, but she didn't waver. If her millionaire husband was about to re-enter her life, then let him. This time, she was ready. Sophia exhaled slowly, steadying herself as she smoothed the fabric of her black dress. Her fingers briefly curled into fists before she forced them to relax. No matter what happened tonight, she had already won. A hush spread through the ballroom as a group of security personnel stepped inside, scanning the room. Then, through the entrance, he appeared. Nolan Lancaster. The millionaire husband she had once loved, and the man who had abandoned her when she needed him most. He looked exactly as she remembered, yet somehow different. His tailored navy suit fit him perfectly, exuding power, but there was a tiredness around his eyes, a tension in his jaw that hadn't been there before. His gaze swept across the room, and when it landed on her, everything stilled. Olivia, oblivious to the charged silence, smiled brightly. "Mr. Lancaster, this is Miss Caldwell, our featured artist." She gestured toward Sophia, then hesitated as she noticed his reaction. For a moment, Nolan said nothing. His eyes widened slightly, his usually composed features betraying a flicker of disbelief. Sophia inclined her head politely, her voice smooth. "Mr. Lancaster?" The sound of her voice seemed to snap him out of his trance. He cleared his throat, schooling his expression into something more neutral. "Miss Caldwell," he responded, though his voice was hoarse. "I've been looking forward to seeing your work." Olivia, still sensing an odd tension, excused herself to handle other preparations, leaving them alone. Sophia turned toward the display, maintaining professional poise as she guided him through the collection. She explained her techniques, the inspirations behind the pieces, keeping her tone measured and distant. Yet she could feel his gaze flicker from the artwork to her, as if trying to make sense of what stood before him. Then they reached the last painting. Rising Dawn. A lone figure cradling a child against a vast, uncertain horizon. The deep hues blended into soft streaks of gold, a story of struggle and resilience woven into every brushstroke. Sophia felt the familiar ache in her chest but kept her expression calm. "This piece represents a turning point in my life." Nolan stared at it for a long moment. His hand went to his jaw, fingers brushing his stubble, a telltale sign that his composure was slipping. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "I heard rumors that you left the city, that you were—" He hesitated, pregnant. Sophia swallowed but kept her chin high. "Yes," she said, her tone unreadable. "You made it clear you didn't want a child, so I left." The words hung in the air, sharp and unflinching. Nolan's eyes darkened, emotions warring within him, his fingers clenched at his sides. Did you keep it?" The uncertainty in his voice, the hesitation, made something in her chest tighten. She refused to let pity soften her. With a steady nod, she gave him the answer that would change everything. "She's 5 years old." Nolan's breath caught, and for the first time in all the years she had known him, she watched him stumble back a half-step, as if the weight of her words had physically struck him. The grand ballroom, filled with warm golden light, suddenly felt suffocating. The weight of 5 years pressed between them, thick and inescapable. Nolan Lancaster, a man who commanded boardrooms and dictated the fate of billion-dollar deals, looked as though the ground had just shifted beneath him. His chest rose and fell in slow, uneven breaths, his carefully maintained composure splintering before her eyes. Sophia remained still, refusing to step back, refusing to give him even an inch of ground. She had imagined this moment 100 times, his shock, his regret, the questions she knew were coming. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, he was the one speechless. The tension wrapped around them, making the grand space feel smaller, quieter, as if the world had narrowed down to a single, undeniable truth. Nolan Lancaster had a daughter he had never known. He swallowed hard. "She, our daughter." The words were barely more than a whisper. "Does she know about me?" Sophia's fingers curled at her side, steadying herself. "Her name is Lily," she said evenly, the tightness in her throat betraying none of her emotions. "She's bright, kind, and curious, and yes, she knows she has a father." She exhaled slowly before adding, "But I never let her hope for a man who never wanted her." His expression twisted at the quiet but brutal truth, a flicker of something, pain, guilt, maybe both, crossed his features. "I made mistakes," he murmured. Before he could say more, Olivia's heels clicked sharply against the polished floors as she approached. "Mr. Lancaster, the guests for the exclusive event will be arriving soon." Panic flickered in his eyes, but his voice remained low, urgent. "Please, can we talk later? Alone?" Sophia hesitated. She had told herself she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a conversation, that he didn't deserve it. And yet, the man standing before her wasn't the cold, indifferent husband who had once thrown her away. He looked unsettled, human. Against her better judgment, she gave a single nod. After the preview. The moment shattered as the doors opened, ushering in a wave of Manhattan's elite, philanthropists, collectors, and business moguls eager to support the foundation. Nolan straightened, falling into his role with practiced ease. He greeted acquaintances, shook hands, and masked the turmoil behind a polished exterior. Sophia, too, smiled, answered questions about her paintings, and played the part of the rising artist. But beneath it all, her mind churned with one undeniable revelation. Nolan Lancaster, her millionaire husband, was the benefactor behind this event, and now there was no escaping the conversation that was coming. As the evening unfolded, Nolan remained close, but never intruded, his presence a constant weight in Sophia's periphery. Their eyes met across the room more than once, each stolen glance charged with an uneasy energy that tightened in her chest. She moved through conversations with donors, speaking about the inspiration behind her work, while carefully guarding her personal history. Her art had always been a reflection of her journey, but tonight she realized more than ever that she had to protect the life she had built. By the time the last guest departed, exhaustion pressed against her temples. Olivia offered an apologetic smile, confirming the schedule for the upcoming gala, while Nolan lingered nearby, waiting. Sophia considered leaving without another word, but a part of her knew they needed closure. Away from the glittering ballroom, they found a secluded hallway near the exit, dimly lit, the quiet stretching thick between them. Nolan's voice, softer than she expected, broke the silence. "Where are you staying? I'd like to see Lily." The way he said her daughter's name, tentative, reverent, made something tighten in Sophia's chest. But she didn't let it show. "You don't get to walk back into her life because of some moral revelation," she said, her voice steady. "You told me to leave when I was pregnant. You made me feel like I was nothing." His face twisted, as if her words physically struck him. "I know," he admitted, dragging a hand through his hair. "I was scared. I convinced myself that having a child would ruin everything I'd built." He exhaled, shaking his head. "I was selfish, and I can't undo that. But I can try to be part of her life now." Sophia studied him for a long moment, her pulse hammering. "Lily deserves stability, not a half-hearted attempt at redemption," she finally said. "I need to be sure you won't hurt her the way you hurt me." Regret flickered across his face, raw and unguarded. After a beat of silence, she relented, just slightly. "I'm staying at the Hawthorne Suites. She's with a friend. If you really want to talk about this, meet me at the cafe next door tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Nolan exhaled, a quiet thank you slipping from his lips. He stepped forward, hesitation in his movements, as if instinct told him to reach for her. Sophia took a step back. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. He stayed in the hallway watching her disappear, his world shifting in ways he hadn't anticipated. The past had shattered, leaving only raw accountability and a 5-year-old child caught between them. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of the Rosewood Cafe, its warm glow softening the quiet hum of conversation. Sophia arrived just before 9, ordering a latte and settling at a secluded table near the back. The faint strains of French music played in the background, steadying her nerves. She had left Lily in Margaret's care at the hotel, offering only a vague explanation. This was a private conversation from her past. At 9:05, Nolan walked through the door, his gaze sweeping the cafe before landing on her. Nolan scanned the cafe until his gaze landed on Sophia. She sat in the far corner, poised, unreadable, her fingers curled around a latte that had likely gone cold. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, a stark contrast to the relaxed atmosphere around them, before approaching with measured steps. She motioned for him to sit, but her expression remained distant. For a long moment, neither spoke. Sophia sipped her coffee, ignoring the storm of emotions she refused to show. It was Nolan who finally broke the silence. "Thank you for meeting me." She gave a slight nod, but her voice was firm. "I'll get straight to the point. Lily is my priority. Her well-being comes first, and I won't allow anyone to disrupt that, including you." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I understand." His fingers toyed with a sugar packet on the table, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "I want to be in her life. I know I don't deserve an easy path, but I'm asking for a chance." Sophia studied him, searching for cracks in his sudden determination. "Why now?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Because you recognized me at the gala? Because the guilt of having a daughter you never knew finally caught up to you?" His jaw tightened. "It's not just guilt," he exhaled sharply. "I've had regrets for a long time." She arched a brow, unconvinced. "I'm not here to make excuses," he admitted, voice low. "I was selfish. I told myself a child would derail my ambitions, that your pregnancy was a betrayal." His hands clenched briefly before he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph. Sophia's breath hitched. She recognized it instantly, a candid snapshot from their honeymoon. She was in his arms, her laughter frozen in time, the happiness in her eyes untouched by the heartbreak that would come. "I've kept this for years," Nolan said, his voice rough. "I look at it sometimes and wonder what we could have been, if I hadn't pushed you away." Sophia stared at the photo, feeling a familiar ache stir in her chest, but she refused to let nostalgia soften her resolve. "If you want a relationship with Lily, you'll have to prove yourself," she said finally. "That means real, consistent effort. She's not a business deal you can negotiate your way into, Nolan. She's a child." His shoulders dropped slightly, his hands tightening around the photo before tucking it away. "I know. That's why I've already started making changes," he exhaled. "I've shifted more responsibilities to my executive team. I built my empire thinking it was the only thing that mattered. But now I want to be present for her." Sophia studied him carefully, weighing his words. Her millionaire husband had once chosen power over family. If he truly wanted to be a father now, he would have to prove it. Sophia tapped her fingers against the table, keeping her voice steady. "We start slow, supervised meetings only, in public places. You'll be introduced as a family friend, and I'll be there the entire time." Nolan exhaled, relief flashing across his face. "That's all I could ask for." She met his gaze, her stomach tightening at the emotion in his eyes. "This is for Lily. Don't mistake it for forgiveness." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "I understand." They agreed on a plan. The first meeting would take place at a children's activity cafe near the hotel in 2 days. If Lily responded well, they would consider another lunch, but nothing was guaranteed. As they stepped outside, Sophia realized her hands were trembling. Nolan lingered on the sidewalk, watching her walk away with an expression that once would have unraveled her completely. But now, all that mattered was Lily's happiness. Whether this reunion would heal old wounds or rip them further apart remained to be seen. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of nerves. Sophia wrestled with equal parts dread and cautious hope. Margaret, ever the voice of reason, reassured her. "You're controlling the pace, and that means you're protecting her." Lily, meanwhile, beamed when Sophia mentioned that a special friend would be joining them for lunch. "Will they play with me?" she asked eagerly. "We'll see," Sophia replied, brushing a curl from her daughter's forehead. Lily had no idea how much this moment meant. Finally, the day arrived. The supervised visitation took place at the Playhouse, a vibrant activity cafe filled with the happy chaos of children. Murals of storybook castles and whimsical forests stretched across the walls, laughter echoing from the ball pit and craft stations. Sophia led Lily through the crowd, past a group of kids stacking oversized phone blocks. Margaret followed at a discreet distance, ready to step in if needed. Across the cafe, Nolan sat at a small corner table, fidgeting with a plastic tiara an employee had jokingly handed him. When he looked up and spotted them, tension tightened his features. "Stay calm," she reminded herself, forcing a polite smile. Stopping a few steps away, she crouched next to Lily and spoke gently. "Sweetheart, this is Mr. Nolan. He's an old friend of Mommy's." Lily studied him curiously, tilting her head. "Hi, Mr. Nolan." Nolan's breath hitched at the sound of her voice, his fingers tightening around the toy. But when he spoke, his tone was soft, careful. "Hi, Lily." Lily's eyes drifted toward the plastic tiara in Nolan's hand, curiosity lighting up her face. "Do you like princess crowns?" A small, hesitant smile curved his lips. "I'm more of a business suit guy, but for today, sure." She giggled and reached for the crown, standing on tiptoes to place it on his head. Nolan bent slightly, letting her adjust it. "You look like a king now," she declared. Sophia felt something tighten in her chest at how easily Lily accepted him. If only she knew the truth. They settled at a table in the cafe's play area, ordering apple slices, peanut butter sandwiches, and juice boxes. Lily chattered excitedly between bites, telling Nolan about her favorite colors, her stuffed bunny, buttons, and the new best friend she had back home. Nolan listened intently, nodding and asking small questions, his attention fully on her. Occasionally his gaze flickered toward Sophia, unreadable but heavy with meaning. A staff member announced story time, and Lily's face lit up with excitement. She barely spared a glance before dashing off to join the circle of children. Nolan watched her go, something fragile in his expression. "She's incredible," he murmured. "Thank you for raising her." Sophia's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "She's her own person," she said quietly. "I just gave her a safe place to grow." She kept her tone even, but there was no denying the emotion beneath her words. When storytime ended, Lily returned wearing a paper crown she had decorated herself. With a giggle, she plopped down beside Nolan and held it up. "This one's better than yours." Laughing softly, he took off the plastic tiara and swapped it for hers. "Yours is much nicer," he agreed. Sophia watched the exchange with a mix of relief and quiet ache. Nolan wasn't trying to force himself into Lily's life. He wasn't making grand gestures or claiming a role he hadn't earned. He was simply present, absorbing every second as if he could make up for lost time. After an hour, Sophia decided it was enough for one day. As they prepared to leave, Lily turned to Nolan, eyes hopeful. "Will I see you again?" Nolan looked at Sophia, silently asking for permission. She hesitated before nodding. "One step at a time." He crouched beside Lily, offering a small wave. "I'd love to see you again, if your mom says it's okay." Lily grinned and threw her arms around him in a quick hug. "You're fun." Outside, Margaret gave Sophia a discreet thumbs up, while she exhaled shakily. By the cafe entrance, Nolan stood motionless, the paper crown still in his hand, watching them go. It had only been a single meeting, but it felt monumental. For the first time, the millionaire husband had stepped beyond his past mistakes and glimpsed the daughter he had once lost. As Sophia led Lily away from the cafe, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe letting Nolan in wasn't just about giving Lily a chance to know her father. Maybe, in some way, it was about finally finding peace for herself. The days that followed were a quiet storm of emotions. Nolan texted daily, not demanding, not overstepping, just checking in. His messages carried a humility and sincerity she had never seen in him before. He shared how much that brief hour had meant to him, how he couldn't stop thinking about Lily's laughter, her curious little questions. Sophia kept her responses polite but firm, maintaining the boundaries she had set. Yet, beneath her caution, something shifted. The anger she had carried for 5 years no longer felt like an immovable weight. Meanwhile, the city buzzed about the upcoming Westbridge Foundation Gala. Invitations had circulated among Chicago's elite, promising a dazzling evening of philanthropy and art. Sophia, once reluctant to speak publicly about her work, had found herself at the center of attention. The reclusive artist with an untold story. One afternoon, Nolan asked to meet for lunch, just the two of them, to discuss a co-parenting arrangement. She hesitated but agreed, choosing an upscale bistro near the Riverwalk, another neutral, public place. When she arrived, he was already there, tapping his phone nervously. As she approached, he stood, pulling out her chair. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. She nodded, picking up the menu. "Let's talk about Lily." Nolan leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I want to do this right. I'm willing to commit to spending time with her regularly. Saturdays if that works. We can explore the city, museums, parks, maybe even a children's concert if she's interested." Sophia studied him, measuring his words. "She loves museums and music," she admitted. "But if you make a promise, you have to keep it." He met her gaze, unwavering. "I will. I won't repeat my mistakes." For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unspoken. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she asked. Why did you hate the idea of a child so much back then? Nolan exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. My father was distant, obsessed with work. I grew up never knowing if I mattered to him beyond being another responsibility. He hesitated. I swore I'd never be like him, but when you got pregnant, I panicked. I convinced myself that being a father would mean becoming him. Sophia swallowed hard, his words scraping against old wounds. Nolan shook his head. I was wrong, and I regret it every single day. Nolan's fingers tightened around the water glass, his knuckles white. And somehow I became exactly what I swore I wouldn't, he admitted, his voice raw. A man who thought providing money was enough while ignoring what really mattered. Worse, I pushed you away. Sophia's throat tightened. She had spent too many nights alone, pregnant and terrified, wishing he had shown even a fraction of this vulnerability. Lily deserves your best, she said quietly. If you're serious about being in her life, I won't stand in the way, but if you falter... She stopped herself, swallowing the lump in her throat. I won't. His voice was steady, resolute. If you doubt me, watch my actions. I'll show up. They spoke for a while longer, working through the details. Sophia insisted that any formal introduction as Lily's father would have to wait. Nolan, though reluctant, agreed. Before parting, he hesitated. Let me help, with her education, healthcare, whatever she needs. Sophia's first instinct was to refuse. She had spent years standing on her own, refusing to rely on him. But pride had no place where Lily's future was concerned. I'll think about it, she finally said before rising from the table. Nolan remained seated, watching her go, his expression weighted with emotions too complex to name. Stepping onto the busy sidewalk, Sophia exhaled. The conversation had left her shaken, but not broken. For the first time in years, she had faced the man who had once shattered her, and she had walked away stronger. Whether Nolan's change was real or just fleeting guilt, only time would tell. That question would have to wait. The night of the charity gala arrived in a blur of flashing cameras and anticipation. A red carpet stretched before the grand entrance of the Westbridge Hotel, welcoming Chicago's elite into an opulent ballroom draped in shimmering lights. The air buzzed with champagne-soaked conversation as photographers snapped pictures of socialites, celebrities, and business magnates gathering for the cause. Sophia stood near her art display, her heartbeat steady but electric. She wore an emerald gown that shimmered beneath the chandeliers, her hair swept into a loose updo that exuded effortless confidence. This was her moment, not just as an artist, but as a woman who had rebuilt herself from the ground up. For the first time in 5 years, she and Nolan would be seen in the same room, not as husband and wife, not as adversaries, but as two people bound by a secret far more powerful than their past, Lily. Margaret had taken Lily back to the hotel suite, away from the media frenzy, but Sophia still felt the weight of her daughter's presence in every choice she made. She had once been the quiet woman standing in Nolan Lancaster's shadow. Tonight, she stood in her own light. And she was ready for whatever came next. The gala wasn't meant for a 5-year-old, but part of Sophia wished Lily could see this, her mother standing tall, no longer overshadowed by the past. The ballroom buzzed with anticipation as guests admired the carefully curated art displays. Olivia Marks wove through the crowd, her smile bright as she reached Sophia's side. Your pieces are drawing a lot of attention. And, she hesitated before adding, Mr. Lancaster will be introducing you before your speech. A flicker of tension ran through Sophia's spine. Nolan, speaking on her behalf? The idea was almost absurd. But she forced herself to remain composed. She had earned this moment, and no one, not even her millionaire husband, could take that from her. Minutes later, the lights dimmed slightly as Nolan took the stage, his midnight blue tuxedo impeccable. The murmurs softened into silence, the weight of his presence commanding attention. His speech began with the importance of the Westbridge Foundation's work, his voice steady, measured. Then, seamlessly, he shifted. Tonight, we have the privilege of showcasing art that tells stories of resilience and transformation, he said, his gaze sweeping the audience. Few artists capture that spirit as profoundly as Miss Sophia Caldwell. Applause rose as Sophia approached the stage. For the briefest moment, her eyes met Nolan's. There was pride there, an unspoken acknowledgement, maybe even an apology. But she refused to dwell on it. Turning to the microphone, she steadied her breath. She spoke about the power of art to reflect struggle and renewal, about how each painting carried its own journey. Though she never explicitly mentioned her past, the truth wove itself into her words. She ended by thanking the Foundation for their commitment to helping women reclaim their futures, their independence, their voices. The room erupted into a standing ovation. Flashes went off as cameras captured the moment. Sophia Caldwell, poised, accomplished, untouchable. As she stepped down, Nolan extended his hand, wordlessly offering support. For a heartbeat, she hesitated. Then, with quiet grace, she placed her fingertips against his, letting him guide her off the stage. "Your speech was incredible," he murmured. "I'm honored to have supported this cause." She withdrew her hand gently. "Thank you," she replied, her tone unreadable. "You did well too." The charity auction commenced, raising extraordinary sums. Several of Sophia's paintings sparked competitive bidding, culminating in a record sale that left her both stunned and deeply grateful. Nearby, Nolan was approached by powerful executives, congratulating him on the event's success. Meanwhile, Sophia moved through the crowd, receiving praise from collectors and donors, her heart pounding with exhilaration. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was thriving. Sophia stepped onto the terrace, seeking a moment of quiet away from the glowing chandeliers, and murmured congratulations. Below, the city pulsed with life, the golden light stretching endlessly into the night. Footsteps approached behind her. Nolan. There was a tension in his posture, a hesitance she wasn't used to seeing. "I wanted to say goodbye before I leave," he said softly. "And to ask if I could see Lily tomorrow." Sophia turned, searching his face for any trace of hesitation. Instead, she saw only quiet determination. "I was thinking we could take her to the Children's Museum before you head back to Boston." Memories flickered. Pain, abandonment, the nights she spent whispering to her unborn child, promising she'd never let her feel unwanted. But another memory surfaced too. Lily's laughter when she met Nolan for the first time. The way she had so easily accepted him, unaware of the past that complicated his presence in her life. Sophia inhaled. "Yes," she said finally. "We'll take it one step at a time." Relief softened Nolan's features, his gratitude clear in the way his shoulders loosened. "Thank you, Sophia." For a moment, they stood side by side, two people who had once been bound by love and then torn apart by betrayal. Now, they faced something neither had expected, a chance to rewrite their roles, not as husband and wife, but as parents navigating an uncertain future. Inside, the sound of applause continued, the world still seeing them as nothing more than philanthropic allies. But standing in the night air, the truth was far more complicated. Life's greatest losses sometimes pave the way for unexpected rebirth. Sophia had once been shattered by Nolan's rejection, forced to rebuild herself from nothing. Now, she stood stronger, not defined by his past mistakes, but by the love she had found in raising their daughter. And Nolan, blinded by ambition, haunted by regret, was learning that no amount of wealth, no empire he'd built, could fill the void left by the child he had once denied. Their reunion, first through a chance encounter at a charity gala, then through cautious visits with Lily, was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal, if both were willing to try. If Sophia's resilience and Nolan's redemption resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because even in life's darkest moments, hope and new beginnings are always possible.